names of contractors and workers who were working in the neighborhood on those houses, on those construction projects.
Federal investigators managed to extract a collection of thumbnail images from the surveillance cameras positioned on Nancy Guthrie's property. The visual records stretched back for weeks before she vanished, documenting the mundane comings and goings of landscapers, pool technicians, and members of her family. The recovery of this footage was first reported by ABC News, a detail later confirmed by CBS News, and sources informed both networks that nothing within the recordings appeared unusual. But a crucial question remains unasked in the public sphere. Who else was actively working within that neighborhood during the month of January? And have the authorities interviewed all of them? Because a gardener, a man who services properties in Nancy's immediate vicinity, has come forward with a statement that should have dominated the headlines. He revealed to a journalist that in all the weeks that have passed since Nancy Guthrie went missing, not a single police officer had ever approached him. He considered that fact surprising, as do I. And as you should. For those who have followed this series, the fundamental shape of this case is already known. You know that Nancy Guthrie's last confirmed sighting was on the evening of January 31st, when her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, dropped her off at her residence. The time was approximately 9:48 at night. You know she was declared missing the next morning, on February 1st, after failing to log on for a virtual church service. You know the Federal Bureau of Investigation has been involved since the early stages. You know a joint task force remains active. And you know that there are suspects, theories, and evidentiary threads of which the public has only been shown fragments. It begins with a gardener, standing in a yard near the very paths where Nancy used to walk her dog. And it concludes with a question that should fundamentally reframe how you perceive who had the access, the knowledge, and the perfect opportunity to abduct her. In affluent enclaves like the Catalina Foothills, the residents themselves are often like ghosts. They work from their homes. They are often away traveling. They employ others to maintain the pristine condition of their properties. The individuals who are most visible, the people who are constantly outdoors, moving along the streets and through the manicured yards, passing through the alleys, side gates, and delivery entrances, are not the residents. They are the workforce, landscapers, pool maintenance crews, HVAC contractors, pest control teams, window washers, and general laborers. They are construction workers, raising additions, remodeling kitchens, or replacing roofing. They are delivery drivers and security system technicians. In a community like the Catalina Foothills, these individuals are a constant daily presence. They arrive and depart with a regularity that the homeowners themselves scarcely register anymore. But here is the nature of visibility. It is a two-way street. The workers observe everything. They see which residence has cameras and precisely where those cameras are pointed. They see which driveway is empty at 8 a.m. every morning and which car is perpetually present. They register when the dog is walked and at what specific time. While trimming hedges, they overhear private conversations that drift through open windows. They perceive any deviation from the established routine when a familiar car has been missing for a week, or when a new face begins to appear. In the literature of criminology, this phenomenon is sometimes referred to as ambient surveillance, the passive, unintentional, yet comprehensive knowledge that accumulates over time simply by being repeatedly present in a given space. Workers in residential areas acquire this deep knowledge without even trying, and in a case where the aggressor clearly understood Nancy's routine, clearly possessed an intimate knowledge of her property, and clearly acted on a pre-existing plan, the question of who else held that same ambient awareness of her life is not a trivial one. It is, in fact, central to the entire mystery. Now, ABC News was the first to report that federal agents had recovered thumbnail images from the camera system on Nancy's property. CBS News would later confirm that reporting. The data consisted of weeks of thumbnails, going back long before February 1st. These images originated from motion-activated cameras that covered the swimming pool, the backyard, and the side yard. And according to sources with direct knowledge of the investigation, those images revealed only landscapers, pool workers, and family members. Nothing suspicious. But here is the critical detail that was buried in the subsequent coverage, and it represents one of the single most significant facts in this entire investigation. Those very same cameras, the ones that had diligently captured all routine activity for weeks before Nancy disappeared, recorded absolutely nothing on the night she was taken. Not a single image was triggered by motion. Not a solitary frame exists. On the night of her abduction, the cameras simply went dark. Sources familiar with the case described this failure with a single, deliberate word: odd. Not explained, not accounted for, merely odd. The cameras were functioning before that night, and they were functioning after. But on the one night that mattered above all others, they captured nothing. This aligns with a theory we have previously explored in this series, the Wi-Fi jammer hypothesis. This is the suggestion that whoever abducted Nancy utilized a device to disrupt the wireless signal throughout the neighborhood, thereby neutralizing the cameras without ever touching them. Several of Nancy's neighbors reported simultaneous internet outages that very same night, and their own Ring cameras malfunctioned within the exact same window of time. This method of technological interference is now considered an established threat within the scope of the investigation. There is a single, critical detail to bear in mind as this story unfolds. Whoever abducted Nancy seemed to possess an intimate familiarity with the placement of her security cameras, a level of awareness that is not acquired by chance. It becomes necessary, then, to examine the inherent limitations of that surveillance footage, because the cameras on the property were focused solely inward, recording only the property itself. Their electronic eyes registered only what breached the gate, what traversed the driveway, and what neared the home's main or side entrances. A landscaping team 3 houses away, a construction crew active on an adjacent street, a lone worker in a truck observing foot traffic for 45 minutes. None of this would appear in the camera footage. None of it would exist in the thumbnails. This presents what could be termed the surveillance radius problem. And in a community as spacious and secluded as the Catalina Foothills, it represents a profound gap in awareness. An individual could have spent weeks observing Nancy from adjacent properties, from a local work site, from a parked vehicle, any vantage point that remained just beyond the camera's field of view. All of that crucial observation would have gone unrecorded, leaving no imprint on the digital evidence the FBI would later review. So, when sources assert that nothing looked suspicious in the footage from the cameras, that is, in a literal sense, a truthful statement. It is not, however, a complete one. On March 13th, a man employed as a gardener in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood gave a statement to an investigative journalist. The account was subsequently picked up by the Mirror US. The Irish Star also reported on it, and what the gardener said was simple, direct, and frankly stunning at this stage of the investigation. He expressed bewilderment at seeing pool cleaning employees active in the backyard, a sight he described as distinctly odd. This was, by all accounts, her scheduled routine maintenance. He questioned the logic of allowing anyone onto the grounds who might contaminate a potential crime scene while an investigation was ongoing, even after its initial release. It was a decision, he implied, that he would never have made until the case was much further down the road. Yet, his most jarring revelation was this: the police had never spoken to him. Not once. In all the weeks that had passed since Nancy's disappearance, no detective, no federal agent, no investigator of any kind had ever knocked on his door or approached him at a job site to ask what he might have observed. It was an omission he found, in his own word, surprising. And when asked when he had last seen Nancy herself, he estimated it had been somewhere between 8 months and a full year prior. He recalled a brief, friendly encounter, a simple hi in the morning. That was the last memory he possessed of her, a detail with profound implications. This is a man with a consistent professional presence in the very neighborhood where Nancy Guthrie was taken. He is familiar with the streets. He is familiar with the residents and the routines of each property. He was a pair of eyes on the ground, a constant presence, and yet he was never interviewed. To be meticulously clear, for this is an important distinction, there is no suggestion here that this gardener is a suspect. There is no implication of any wrongdoing on his part whatsoever. What his testimony represents is that of a potential witness, and the fact that investigators had not spoken to him raises a serious question about the scope of the investigative net. A standard canvas in a missing person or abduction case, especially an incident involving a high-profile individual in a residential area, should reach every person with regular access to that location. That list includes postal carriers, delivery drivers, and various construction workers. And it most assuredly includes the landscapers and gardeners who service the very street on which the victim lived. If this man had not been interviewed by March 13th, one must ask how many other service workers in that neighborhood were also never approached. And a more urgent question follows. What did those other workers see? The gardener recalled not having seen Nancy for somewhere between 8 months and a year. His uncertainty about the exact window is less revealing than the range itself, because in either scenario, we are confronted with a significant passage of time. A man who works regularly on Nancy's street had not physically laid eyes on her in nearly a year. Consider the true meaning of that fact for a gardener working inside a tightly knit residential enclave. It means that for a substantial period, Nancy was not a regular, visible presence in her own front yard or driveway. It signifies that she was either away traveling or was restricting her movements to a different part of the property or had altered her outdoor habits. And there is one other possibility worth noting, that she was already being careful. The theory that her disappearance was not random has been a central thread that whoever was responsible possessed inside knowledge that there was premeditation. If Nancy herself had reason to feel she was being watched or followed in the months before February, if she had already altered her own patterns, that extended absence from the visible portions of her own yard might not be a coincidence at all. But putting that chilling possibility aside, there is a more immediate and tactical implication. If a worker with a constant presence on that street had not physically seen Nancy in almost a year, then the question of who in that neighborhood last observed her, and when, becomes a matter of supreme investigative importance. But had her movements been noted by others in the time just before she vanished? Was there a distinct period when her daily patterns became predictable again, right before February 1st? And if so, whose eyes were tracking that fragile window of opportunity? We turn now to a specific line of inquiry, one centered on construction, a detail that demands closer scrutiny, and it is essential to understand how this theory emerged and the compelling reasons why it must be thoroughly pursued. Let me be perfectly clear. Despite any rumors, no specific construction worker has been officially named as a person of interest in this investigation. Anyone claiming otherwise is moving faster than the facts allow, a path I refuse to take. Instead, what I will do is lay out the methodical reasoning for why construction activity in the Catalina Foothills during January and early February represents a critical investigative thread. One, the FBI, if they are not already exploring this vector, must begin to unravel immediately. The Catalina Foothills is an enclave of high property values, a place defined by a state of perpetual renovation, where the construction of new homes on any open parcel of land is a constant feature of the landscape. Throughout January, in the weeks that preceded her disappearance, the area would have been alive with active work sites. These were projects situated well within the visual and logistical perimeter of her own property. The laborers at these sites would have been a consistent presence, day in and day out, establishing their own predictable routines. And most critically, their presence in that neighborhood for hours on end would have appeared entirely legitimate. Consider for a moment the spatial dynamics at play here. A construction crew situated on a lot just 1 or 2 streets from her residence would have a direct line of sight to her street, observing the rhythm of her vehicle's arrivals and departures. They would have absorbed her routine, and a work truck parked at a street corner raises absolutely no alarm. No one reports a utility vehicle to the authorities. No one is asking for identification from a crew in a community where half the lots are under development. This is the perfect cover, legitimate, unremarkable, and completely invisible to suspicion. And for an abduction that demanded surveillance, precision timing, and meticulous planning, such cover is of incalculable value. So, did the FBI examine the permits? The building permit archives for Tucson are a matter of public record. In theory, this means every single construction project underway in the Catalina Foothills in January should be traceable through the municipal system. This implies that every contractor who secured a permit can be identified. Every licensed crew working within that zip code during that time frame exists on paper, waiting to be found. The unanswered question is whether investigators have performed this essential cross-referencing, if they have compiled the permit data, mapped out every active job site within a given radius of her home, and then interviewed every single worker who was part of that local landscape in January and the first few days of February. Judging by what the gardener revealed that he was never formally interviewed by law enforcement, it suggests the canvassing of the area may have been dangerously incomplete, and that represents a significant problem. In an earlier installment, we laid out what I termed the insider knowledge framework. The premise was straightforward. The details surrounding her abduction strongly indicate that the perpetrator possessed specific, intimate, and actionable knowledge of her life, her home, her schedule, her private world, and her points of vulnerability. This is not information one gleans from a casual drive past a house. It is intelligence acquired through sustained observation, or it is fed from an inside source. We have already applied this framework to several possibilities: family, friends, close acquaintances, even domestic staff employed within the home. Now, we must apply it to a category that has been largely overlooked. This is the vast ecosystem of service workers that circulates through affluent residential communities. Imagine for a moment what a service provider learns through months of routine visits to a single neighborhood. They learn the gate codes, often provided directly by the homeowners. They learn which doors are routinely left unsecured while they work. They come to know which homes have guard dogs and which do not. They map out which properties have conspicuous security cameras and which angles offer blind spots. They internalize the schedules of the residents because the residents themselves volunteer the information. I'll be gone between 10 and 2. Just use the side gate. This isn't evidence of criminal conspiracy. It is simply the ordinary, functional exchange of information that occurs every single day between homeowners and the people they hire in neighborhoods exactly like the Catalina Foothills. It is utterly mundane, and in the possession of the wrong person, it becomes an operational blueprint for a crime. Let's take that concept 1 degree further. What if the individual in question never needed direct access to her specific property at all? What if they had simply worked in the vicinity long enough to assemble a composite picture, house by house, week by week, of who was present, at what times, and with whom? What if her daily routine had become merely one more data point in an intricate mental map of that entire street? We are certain her abduction was not a random act of opportunity. The precision of the timing, the calculated methodology, the tampering with cameras, and the probable use of a signal jammer, every element points toward methodical, deliberate planning. Any successful plan is born from calculation and cunning. Within an insular community like the Catalina Foothills, information is best acquired by someone who belongs an individual who seamlessly merges with the visual tapestry of daily life. Someone whose daily presence registers as normal, never triggering an ounce of suspicion. A landscaper perfectly embodies this role. So too does a construction worker, or the technician who services the swimming pools. And at this moment, it appears that at least one such individual has yet to be questioned by authorities. We are closely monitoring this breaking development out of Tucson, Arizona. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has just disseminated a series of photographs and a video of what they term a potential subject in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. The distinction is critical: a subject, not yet a suspect. Our senior national correspondent is on the ground in the Tucson area, joining us now by phone. This development feels like a profound shift in the investigation. It is a grimly familiar pattern in the annals of criminal justice, the trail of a residential abduction or murder leading back to an individual disguised as a service worker. And this pattern merits closer examination, not for the sake of sensationalism, but because it reveals something fundamental about where investigators should be directing their focus at this very moment. The element that connects so many of these cases is a phase forensic experts refer to as pre-offense reconnaissance. The perpetrator did not strike on a whim. They observed, they methodically mapped their target's environment, and this surveillance was conducted from a position that offered a perfect veneer of legitimacy. In a residential context, that cover is almost invariably linked to a plausible reason for being there: a job, a uniform, a work truck with a company name on its side. Why this is so crucial in the Nancy Guthrie case is not because it confirms anyone's guilt. It confirms nothing at all. What it provides is a known behavioral template, one that law enforcement and forensic psychologists are intimately familiar with. This means that when a kidnapping occurs inside an affluent neighborhood, the canvassing of all service personnel is not merely an option. It is not a task of secondary importance. It should be among the very first systematic actions undertaken. The revelation that a man who works as a gardener on Nancy Street was apparently not included in that canvass as of mid-March, more than 6 weeks after she vanished, suggests either a critical oversight or a highly focused investigation, one where authorities possess a lead so strong they felt a broad search was unnecessary. I cannot definitively say which of these scenarios is true, but I can state that when investigators narrow their focus too quickly, crucial witnesses are overlooked. And when witnesses are missed, vital evidence can be lost forever. The Joint FBI Task Force, now spearheading this investigation, has maintained an unusually guarded posture. And to be clear, that is not inherently a criticism. There are compelling strategic imperatives for withholding information in a kidnapping investigation. You must avoid tipping your hand, alerting a potential suspect to the precise direction of your inquiry. You never publicize the evidence you hold before an arrest is secured. The integrity of the operation is paramount. But this much we can confirm. The task force has been anything but idle. The review of camera footage demonstrates their commitment to the forensic trail. The sheer scale of federal resources involved confirms this case is receiving the gravity it demands. And the fact that we now find ourselves, as this is being recorded, more than 6 weeks deep, with no public arrests and no officially named person of interest, points to one of two stark realities. Either they are meticulously constructing an airtight case around a solid lead, or the investigation has reached a formidable impasse and is in desperate need of new information. What I find particularly fascinating is the specific angle of the security camera footage. The decision to let the story of its existence filter into the public sphere, first via ABC News and later confirmed by CBS, was no accident. Law enforcement agencies do not permit such details to leak to the press without a calculated purpose. There was a distinct reason for that information to emerge when it did, more than 6 weeks into the case. It was either a calculated message intended for someone captured in those video frames, or it was a gambit to solicit tips from the public, from anyone who might recognize a vehicle or a face. If the objective was indeed the latter, if investigators were banking on public assistance to identify the workers seen in that footage, then the gardener's public statement fits perfectly within that same ecosystem of information gathering. He learned of the investigation into the security camera recordings. Realizing he had never been interviewed, he took his story to a journalist. This is a private citizen, acting precisely as a citizen should. The critical question is what investigators will now do with that information. At this point, I feel compelled to address a difficult but necessary subject, and I want to do so with care. The Catalina Foothills and the Tucson area as a whole are home to a substantial informal labor force, including day laborers. This includes informal landscaping teams and workers who drift from one job to the next without leaving a paper trail. These are workers who might lack official documentation, individuals who, for a host of perfectly understandable reasons, operate in the shadows, will not be lining up to voluntarily speak with federal investigators. This is not an indictment of their character. The overwhelming majority of these individuals are guilty of nothing more than attempting to earn a living. But from the cold perspective of an investigation, this concentration of an undocumented labor force creates a kind of informational void, rendering conventional methods like cross-referencing employment records utterly obsolete. Contacting state-licensed contractors and processing background checks via established systems will only ever bring the documented workforce to light. Those laborers paid in cash, who drift between crews, who lack a permanent employer or a stable contact number, inevitably slip through the fissures of a standard canvassing operation. And should one of those individuals have witnessed something crucial, that intelligence may never reach the proper authorities unless a dedicated, boots-on-the-ground outreach is mounted to connect with this shadow workforce. In certain high-stakes cases, investigators have forged alliances with community organizations, Spanish-language media, and worker advocacy groups to penetrate this exact demographic. The question remains, has that strategy been deployed here? We have no way of knowing. What is clear is that a gardener, one who had presumably worked in this area long enough to recognize Nancy Guthrie by sight and to register her prolonged, unsettling absence, had not been contacted by mid-March. That single data point suggests that any outreach to the informal workforce, if it is being conducted at all, has been far from comprehensive. There is another detail concerning the construction and landscaping angle that I believe is not fully appreciated. January in Tucson is a world away from January in Minnesota. There is no frozen earth, no inclement weather that forces a halt to outdoor work. In the Catalina Foothills during January, landscaping crews are fully active. Construction projects advance without delay. Pool maintenance is a year-round constant. The density of outdoor workers present in that neighborhood in the weeks preceding Nancy's disappearance was not diminished by the winter season. It was operating at full capacity, which means the pool of potential witnesses, and more chillingly, the pool of individuals afforded the opportunity for extended reconnaissance, is substantially larger than it might be in a colder climate at that time of year. Workers were ever present. People were constantly moving through that neighborhood, every single day. Eyes were everywhere. And as of now, authorities have apparently not managed to speak with all of them. It is essential to take a step back and acknowledge a critical caveat. We are not privy to the full scope of the FBI task force's actions. We do not have access to their confidential investigative files. The gardener who came forward is a single data point, one man stating that he was never contacted. That is not synonymous with proof that the entire canvas was deficient. Federal inquiries routinely involve extensive work that is never made public. It is entirely possible that worker interviews took place quietly, shielded from media attention, and without any official disclosure. Yet, the gardener's account, and the very fact that he resorted to a journalist rather than the authorities, is itself a powerful signal. When a potential witness feels compelled to go public to be heard, it is a strong indication that the formal channels have failed to reach them. That is a potential fissure in this investigation worth taking seriously. Allow me to present 3 possible scenarios for where the FBI currently stands on this specific issue, the worker and surveillance question. Then, I will offer which one I believe is the most probable based on observable evidence. Scenario 1. Investigators have already thoroughly explored this angle. They have canvassed every worker they could possibly identify and have gathered all the information they required. That intelligence either confirmed this avenue was a dead end, or it guided them toward a specific person of interest against whom they are now quietly building a case. The gardener who spoke out simply fell through a bureaucratic crack. Perhaps his work crew was logged under a contractor's name, and no one recognized that he was a separate individual who also needed to be interviewed directly. Under this particular scenario, the investigation is far more advanced than we realize, and the worker angle has been resolved. Scenario 2. The investigation has been deliberately constrained. Authorities have a specific person, or persons, in their crosshairs, and have been executing a targeted operation rather than a wide-ranging canvas. In this version of events, the gardener was never interviewed because the neighborhood's general workforce was not the investigation's focus. The focus was directed elsewhere, upon a known individual. The worker angle represents a genuine lead that investigators have consciously deprioritized because of a firm belief that they have already identified their subject. Scenario 3. The official canvas is genuinely incomplete. The informal nature of the labor market, combined with the vastness of the neighborhood, and the profound logistical challenge of identifying and contacting every single worker present in that area over a multi-week time frame, all conspired to create significant investigative blind spots. The gardener who came forward is representative of a real, unaddressed class of witness. If this scenario holds true, it means that vital information may still be out there, buried in silence. After a deep immersion into the facts and theories surrounding this case, the most plausible explanation appears to be a chilling fusion of the first and second scenarios, yet with the third carrying a weight that investigators, under the immense pressure of a multi-agency operation and a politically charged victim, might be reluctant to acknowledge. And let there be no doubt, given Savannah Guthrie's public stature, the political undercurrents here are a powerful and complicating force. In any investigation of this magnitude, there is a constant danger. The gravitational pull of a promising lead can cause authorities to narrow their focus, effectively turning away from the broader canvas of possibilities before it has been fully explored. The gardener is a stark reminder that this canvas may still be tragically incomplete, which brings me to a thought that has persisted since this story first emerged. The Savannah Guthrie connection instantly transformed this from a local case into a national event, a reality that produced consequences cutting in opposing directions. On the one hand, the glare of the national spotlight generated a wave of public tips, drew in federal resources, and kept the case alive when a less notable disappearance might have quickly grown cold in the local news cycle. That is an undeniable benefit. On the other hand, this same intense national focus has been almost exclusively aimed at the people in Nancy's most intimate circle, her family dynamics, her private relationships, and those individuals whose names were already orbiting the public sphere adjacent to her life. The narrative gravity of a high-profile case always pulls toward the most sensational elements: the family drama, the celebrity ties, and the cast of characters who already have a recognizable public footprint. That is the story that commands attention. And to be candid, it is the narrative around which most of the coverage has revolved, including, I must acknowledge, portions of this very series. But the stark reality of abduction statistics is that the threat does not always emerge from the inner circle. Often, it lurks at the edges, embodied by people who exist on the periphery of a victim's life, individuals who may have known the victim's environment more intimately than they ever knew the victim herself. A tradesperson who spends months working on a single street has no need to know Nancy Guthrie personally. They do not require her phone number, her social security details, or her family history. They need only to observe the simple rhythms of her life, when her lights go on and off, when her vehicle departs, and when she is left alone. That is intelligence gathered with terrifying ease. And in a neighborhood as sprawling as the Catalina Foothills, that information is readily available to anyone present and observant. I want to focus for a moment on the camera footage itself, because there is a technical aspect here that I feel has not been clearly articulated in the mainstream coverage. When news outlets reported that the FBI had recovered thumbnail images from the property's cameras dating back weeks, they were referring to a particular feature of modern smart home security systems. By default, these systems do not archive continuous, unbroken footage. The majority are designed to store clips activated by motion, but alongside those clips, they generate low-resolution still images, or thumbnails, at regular intervals. These thumbnails are preserved either on a local device or within the cloud, and crucially, they can persist long after the full-resolution video clips have been erased or overwritten. The significance of this cannot be overstated. These thumbnails provide investigators with a coarse but extensive visual timeline of the property, one that extends much further into the past than the primary video record would allow. Even if an intruder had deleted or disrupted the main recordings, these ghost images might still exist, and they can reveal, in broad strokes, a log of who approached the residence over an extended period. We have already established that the Nest doorbell camera was not tied to an active subscription, which is why its footage had to be painstakingly retrieved from Google's deep back-end systems. The thumbnail cameras positioned along the fence, near the pool, and around the yard were different. They were self-contained, motion-activated units that stored their own residual data. This is precisely why the FBI managed to retrieve those images weeks into the investigation, whereas the doorbell footage required an entirely separate and arduous technical recovery mission. But these thumbnails have profound limitations. A thumbnail is a low-resolution still picture, triggered by motion in a designated camera zone. It will almost never provide a clear facial identification. It does not reveal what a person was doing, only that their presence was detected at a particular moment. It captures no audio, and it is completely blind to any activity occurring just outside the camera's fixed field of vision. Therefore, when sources indicate that nothing in the thumbnails appeared suspicious, that is an inherently constrained statement. Thumbnails are not designed to be forensic instruments. They exist to give a homeowner a quick, simple visual log of property activity. Using them as a primary investigative tool is like trying to construct a court case based on grainy security footage from a convenience store 2 blocks away. You may be able to see that an event occurred, but you cannot always see what it was. The larger point is this: the FBI's analysis of the cameras is a beginning, not an end. The thumbnails might reveal who came onto the property itself. They tell us nothing, however, about who may have been watching from across the street, and they offer absolutely no insight into why those very same cameras went completely dark on the night she was taken. Let me be precise about what a thorough canvass of peripheral workers in a case like this ought to include, because I believe it is crucial to benchmark what investigators should be doing against what seems to have taken place. The first phase of the investigation begins. Procure all active building permits within a prescribed radius of the victim's home, typically a quarter mile to a half mile, adjusted for terrain and lines of sight for the 60-day period preceding the event. Every permit on file corresponds to a licensed contractor, and every contractor employs a crew of workers. This creates a documented, traceable chain of individuals. The second phase involves securing all business licenses for landscaping, pool maintenance, pest control, and similar services that were active within the pertinent zip codes. This data is then cross-referenced with residents on the target streets to determine precisely which companies were present in the immediate vicinity. The owners are then interviewed. Crew rosters are obtained. The workers themselves must be questioned directly. Phase 3 requires canvassing day labor collection points. In Tucson, such locations are a known reality, places where an informal workforce congregates at dawn, awaiting offers for work. Investigators who collaborate with community liaisons and Spanish-speaking contacts can penetrate this population in ways that conventional federal methods simply cannot. The fourth phase: issue a focused public appeal asking for any workers who were in the Catalina Foothills area during January and early February to make themselves known. This is not a generic tip line, but a highly targeted request. If you were employed in this specific neighborhood during this time frame, we need to speak with you. Assure their safety in coming forward. It must be made unequivocally clear that providing information is not the same as being considered a suspect. The question, then, is whether any of this has actually been done. Phase 1, one can assume, has likely been executed, given the known sophistication of the FBI task force. Phases 2 and 3, however, appear incomplete, according to the gardener's testimony, and Phase 4 has not been initiated publicly. This is not to suggest the FBI is performing poorly. It is to say that there is a demonstrable gap in the visible strategy. And in an abduction case, where a life may hang in the balance, a failure to close that gap becomes a matter of extreme urgency. The notion of closing in, which this analysis invokes, demands a candid exploration. I will not mislead you into believing an arrest is imminent, or that investigators are moments away from moving on a specific construction worker they have in their sights. I have no knowledge of such developments, and any individual who claims such certainty without attribution, without named sources, without any form of documentary proof, is engaging in pure speculation. What I can convey is the following. When a critical piece of investigative intelligence, such as an uninterviewed witness stating publicly that he has not been approached, breaks into the public domain through the press, it typically produces one of two outcomes. Either authorities were already aware of this person, making the public revelation inconsequential to their progress, or they were not, and the disclosure now generates immense pressure to take action. In this latter scenario, the phrase "closing in" aptly describes the sequence of events that follows. A witness, previously existing outside the perimeter of the investigation, is suddenly drawn into its center. Investigators establish contact. The gardener is finally interviewed. Others in his professional circle are then identified and questioned. And the intelligence gathered from these conversations either validates that nothing of significance was witnessed, or it fractures the case wide open. That second possibility is precisely why this particular thread is so critical. An investigation can remain stagnant for weeks, only to be shattered by a single witness who observed something they never realized held any importance. The gardener might have seen nothing at all, or he might have noticed a face, a vehicle, or a pattern of activity near Nancy Street that, when fused with other evidence already held by the FBI, makes the entire puzzle suddenly lock into place. We simply do not know at this juncture, but the fact that this lead is now public knowledge, the fact this man sought out a journalist instead of waiting for law enforcement to find him, means the pressure on investigators to react is now immense. That is a mechanism in motion, and from an external perspective, that is what the process of closing in truly looks like. Allow me to zoom out and place this worker angle within the broader context of the entire investigation, as I believe several elements we've examined now interlock in previously unseen ways. We are aware the FBI possesses the camera footage. We are aware a joint task force is in operation. We are aware that a great deal of forensic evidence has been collected. DNA analysis is proceeding with urgency, with investigators now resorting to forensic genetic genealogy after initial database queries yielded no matches. We are aware a vehicle tied to individuals who knew Nancy was impounded as evidence. We are aware the Wi-Fi jammer theory raised profound questions about the offender's technical sophistication and degree of planning. We are aware the cameras on Nancy's own property recorded nothing on the night of her abduction, a detail that investigators themselves characterized as unusual. We are aware the insider knowledge framework has largely steered the investigation toward individuals who shared a close, personal familiarity with Nancy. Now, layer this on top of it all, the possibility that someone from the ecosystem of laborers, a contractor, a day worker, a landscaper, a member of a construction crew spent weeks within the visual periphery of Nancy's residence without ever being perceived as significant, without Nancy herself ever perceiving them as a significant presence, without her security system capturing any image that would raise alarm. This theory does not invalidate the others. It simply exists alongside them. And it introduces a question that I believe authorities must answer with certainty. Was this an act perpetrated by someone with an intimate connection to Nancy, or was it a crime carried out by someone with a deep familiarity of her surroundings? These represent two fundamentally different avenues of investigation, yet the necessity for insider knowledge applies to both scenarios. The distinction simply shifts the focus, depending on what kind of insider is being considered. At present, the investigation seems to have focused almost exclusively on individuals within her personal circle. While that approach may prove correct, it might have overlooked the significance of neighborhood insiders. The gardener's testimony is the first piece of public information to suggest this could be the case. So, what should we be looking for in the days and weeks ahead? I can offer several key indicators that will reveal whether this new angle involving local workers is gaining traction within the official inquiry. First, will the gardener who shared his account with reporters be contacted by law enforcement now that he has come forward? Should he confirm publicly that investigators have since made contact, it would be an undeniable sign that his statement has spurred action. If he does not, if weeks pass and he continues to report that he has heard nothing, that silence would imply a very different narrative. Second, will the FBI or the Pima County Sheriff's Office release any public appeal aimed specifically at laborers who were present in the Catalina Foothills area during January and February? A targeted request of that nature would be a clear signal that investigators are now formally pursuing this line of inquiry. Third, be alert for any announcement of a new arrest or person of interest who has a background in the service or construction trades. I am not predicting this will happen. I am stating that if it does, it will signify that the worker theory has unearthed something substantial. Fourth, look for any reports that the FBI has broadened the scope of its search, is collaborating with community groups to connect with undocumented workers, or has released Spanish-language appeals within the Tucson media landscape. Each of these actions would indicate that the investigative perimeter is expanding in the direction this evidence suggests. Nancy Guthrie vanished more than 6 weeks ago. Her family remains in a state of agonizing uncertainty. An entire community invested in this case, including every individual watching at this moment, continues to wait. Every lead that moves this case forward, no matter how insignificant it may seem, is vital. The gardener's account is vital. The unexamined questions about the workforce present in that neighborhood are vital. The gaps in surveillance coverage are vital. The cameras that failed on the night she was abducted are vital, because in an investigation of this nature, the crucial witness is rarely the one you expect. The breakthrough is not always a dramatic confession or security footage capturing the perpetrator in the act. Sometimes it is a man who earns his living trimming hedges, positioned in a yard just 3 houses away, who observed something one morning in January, unaware of its gravity, and has been unknowingly waiting for someone to ask him what he saw. This is the current state of affairs. A clear investigative blind spot. A witness who turned to a journalist because law enforcement had not found him. A neighborhood teeming with workers who, in the weeks before Nancy's disappearance, saw things they may not realize are critical pieces of information. We will continue to monitor this case. We will report on every new turn, every fragment of information that emerges, with the same diligence we have applied from the very beginning. For those who have followed our coverage from the start, you understand our methodology. We do not engage in conjecture for its own sake. We follow the evidence. We pose the difficult questions that remain unspoken, and we will remain on this case until there are answers. If you are watching this and you are employed in the Catalina Foothills region, or if you know somebody who is, particularly anyone who was on a job in that area in January or early February, we urge you to encourage them to contact the authorities. A collective reward of $1.2 million is currently being offered. $1 million from the Guthrie family, $100,000 from the FBI, and an extra $100,000 from an anonymous donor to the 88 Crime Tip Line. The number to contact is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Tips can also be submitted through the web at tips.fbi.gov. You do not need to have witnessed a dramatic event to be a valuable source. At times, the most pivotal witness is the one who noticed an ordinary detail that was simply out of place. If this analysis has given you a new perspective, please share it. Post a comment with your thoughts on what we should investigate next, and subscribe if you wish to follow these investigations, because we have much more work to do. We are far from the end of this story.